What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another video. It is time to continue on the Land Before Time series that I've been doing with my buddy Mike of Did You See That? We are officially on the 9th installment in the series with 5 more to go. There are 14 movies altogether, and it has honestly been so much fun to cover these movies on a nostalgic level, but also, even if I don't enjoy the films, I really enjoy these characters, and it's just been a fun, long journey. I feel proud that we're almost done with this series, and I don't really know too many other channels that have covered all the Land Before Time movies on the channel. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this, and if these videos are what brought you to the channel, I hope you stick around because I definitely plan to cover way more animated films of the 90s and the 2000s, and I've had a lot of fun covering these. So without further ado, let's get into my thoughts and Mike's thoughts on The Land Before Time 9, Journey to Big Water. Once again directed by Charles Grosvenor, this film stars people like John Ingle, Kenneth Mars, Thomas Dekker, Andy McAfee, Rob Paulsen, Aria Noel Curzon, Jeff Burnett, and many more. Here we are with the 9th installment in the series, and before I get too far into this, I'd like to say a big thanks to my buddy Mike of Did You See That for not only joining me once again for another installment right now, but just joining me for this journey so far. I already have his portion as well for the 10th film, so I'll have that video out very soon, and it's just been a blast, like I said in the opener, to cover these movies, even if I haven't enjoyed some of them. And today's going to be one of those movies, as the 9th film, Journey to Big Water, for me was arguably my least favorite sequel of the bunch so far, or at least one of my least favorites. What I'll start this off by saying right out of the gate is that I found the animation here to be pretty solid, with us getting a lot more blending of 2D and 3D animation, which is a little bit new to this series at this point. This film came out in 2002, and similar to the other films, has some sort of natural disaster that ends up threatening the livelihood of our individuals, our characters, or something that changes their world around them, and the kids end up finding some way to save the day, while the parents bitch and moan, stand around wondering where the kids all went. And in the case of this film, the film's called Journey to Big Water. We've seen Big Water in the previous films, and that is what all of the dinosaurs, and most notably the kids, call the ocean. There was a previous film where they were out at sea or near the sea, and that is what they call the ocean Big Water. And at the start of this film, there's an earthquake, or an earth shake as they call it, that ends up causing some water to come from the oceans over the mountains and into the Great Valley, bringing over a new friend, a character named Mo, who is a prehistoric porpoise of some kind. I'm not really sure exactly what dinosaur this creature is, and this creature is actually played by Rob Paulsen, who has played a number of characters in this series so far, but most notably plays the character of Spike, most notably just making noises. Rob Paulsen's really well known for that when it comes to animation in general, especially of the 90s and the early 2000s.
I'm Littlefoot.
Littlefoot?
No, Littlefoot.
Littlefoot?
Well, that's pretty close. What's your name?
Mo.
So in the case of this movie, we have a new friend that is joining the gang. Littlefoot is the first one to first meet this new little guy, and then along the way, the rest of the gang end up coming with Littlefoot to help Mo, this new friend, try to get their way back to the big water, the ocean. So they make their way through a bunch of canals and rivers and different cracks through the mountains to be able to help get Mo back home. And that's the base premise of this film. You have our characters helping a new friend to get back to their home in the ocean. Along the way, there's a mysterious, big, monstrous creature who is the villain of this movie, and is without a doubt the worst villain of this series thus far, as it has zero characterization at all. In the past, there have been plenty of villains that are just generic cartoon villains of their time, but at least they speak their characters and they have some sort of threat that they try to bring to our characters. And in the case of this one, it's just literally a monster who also came over into the Great Valley through the waters and is now just kind of a threat for them as they're trying to get Mo back home to safety. And this character, or this monster, doesn't have a character. It doesn't speak, it just roars and it just chases them, which never really makes sense to me in a movie like The Land Before Time, where all of the animals and creatures all speak. So why are there specific villain monsters that don't speak as well, or specific dinosaurs that are villains that don't speak every here and there, like some of the sharp tooths, some of the T-Rex and different things like that have appeared throughout the course of the series. Every here and there, some of them do speak and sometimes they don't speak. And in the case of the villain here, they don't speak. There's no characterization at all, making them, I think, easily without a doubt, the worst villain that this series has had thus far. And they don't really even have much of a presence in the film until the very end of the film, making them just kind of unnecessary altogether. And now that we've talked about the base premise of the film and my general thoughts on some of the things right out of the gate, I'm going to go ahead and pass it on over to my buddy Mike of Did You See That? And we'll get back to the rest of my thoughts in just a moment.
Hey Perez and everyone over on Anthony Perez's channel watching this video, what's going on? Thank you so much, Anthony, for having me once again to talk about the 9th installment this time of the Land Before Time series, The Land Before Time Journey to Big Water. I'm not going to go over the plot or cast as usual. Anthony's probably covered all that good stuff before it's come over to myself. I'm just going to make this short and sweet. What I will say is the previous installments and the previous sequels that we've covered so far, I haven't exactly been huge on those movies. I think there's been elements where they've shown some kind of positives, but ultimately have kind of just been forgettable movies. And going into Journey to Big Water, kind of had that same feeling, but I was hoping that it would be slightly different. What I will say, guys, is I kind of actually enjoyed this one a little bit more than the previous couple. And I don't know if that's just because I kind of just, switch my brain off a little bit, kind of just forget some of the negatives that we've already had. And don't get me wrong, there's definitely some of those rinse and repeat negatives from the previous movies that I stated, like the songs not being very memorable, these are clearly made for kids, and just having lack of kind of the runtime and using that completely effective. However, there is definitely elements of that in here, but the positives immediately for me is the character of Mo, who I actually thoroughly enjoyed, and I actually found Mo to be a very welcome addition to this franchise, because I found that it was just a very likable character. You followed along with that character just trying to get to Big Water, and this movie kind of focused more on just a standard plot, no kind of stupid crazy side plots to an extent going on here, and it's just more of a simple narrative. And I actually really respected the movie more for that, because it was actually nice to see and kind of refreshing to an extent. We also get to an extent a little bit more of kind of like a solo story of Littlefoot, which again I actually enjoyed. Of course, his friends are along for the ride, but there is times where we get more of kind of just about Littlefoot, making new friends, accepting, new creatures that maybe comes to the mysterious island, or the great beyond, etc. And this movie's definitely got messages about that kind of like acceptance and kind of being open to maybe if someone does come to like your kind of say country residence, or even like place where you like live, it's just nice to kind of have that message here where Littlefoot is happy to accept more and actually help him, and they develop a really cool friendship throughout. The villain here is just pretty weak. It's kind of just like no characterization really, just felt like a villain had to be in here for the sake of having a villain, which I felt like was a little bit of a wasted opportunity. I also felt like, again, some of the songs here and some of the just extended shots of kind of the animation, which, don't get me wrong, the animation's definitely improved here, but there is some shots of the animations that's just kind of extend a little bit, like the same imagery shot for at least like 10 seconds or more, then it kind of cuts to actually like a scene what's going on. I felt like if you trim that down a little bit, got rid of maybe like 1 or 2 songs here, you could have maybe actually had like an hour and 10, hour and 5 minute movie, and I think that would have just made this a little bit more solid to the narrative. But yeah, overall, not actually a too bad entry. Definitely looking forward to Land Before Time 10, which I've actually heard is a bigger improvement on this franchise, but we'll just have to wait and see. But Anthony, thank you so much for having me on once again. Really appreciate it, my man. And until next time, see you later, dude.
A big thanks to Mike for joining me once again. Always a pleasure to have you on, my friend. We got 5 more movies to go, and I've had a blast covering these movies with you thus far. But at the same time, I am very much excited for us to wrap up this series soon enough. So again, a big thanks to Mike. You guys can find the link to his channel down below in the description box. Go give him some love and let him know I sent you. But for now, let's continue on and wrap up my thoughts on the 9th installment in the Land Before Time series, Journey to Big Water. So we've talked about the base premise. We got the kids going to save Mo, taking him to the big water. Along the way, they end up getting into some trouble, and you have the parents back home bitching and moaning, wondering what's happened to their kids and how they can save them. Eventually, of course, the kids end up getting Mo to the big water at the end of the film after fighting the big creature that has no characterization that I was mentioning earlier, and then the kids end up making their way back to the Great Valley with their family, and the movie ends with a nice bow on top, as it typically does. And in a lot of ways, that's a pretty generic, straightforward Land Before Time movie, and for me, I just really wish that there was more to this movie. It felt like there really wasn't much when it came to the story or the characters. There wasn't really much that really happened. It felt like there was a lot of just walking around, jumping from this place to that place, and while there were a couple of moments and some set pieces where they had to really figure something out, most of it feels like it was very breezed over, even more so than a lot of the other films. And all these films are simplistic. They're all pretty generic in a lot of ways. They're all very, very cookie cutter in a lot of ways. So for me to feel this way about this one, I think really just showcases that this one just was even more so generic. It just felt uneventful is really the main thing I could say. It felt a lot of times like some of the shots would linger on landscapes or characters walking for far longer than they would typically in previous films, simply because they probably just didn't have enough story to really fill out the screen time. Overall, this was an enjoyable watch because I enjoyed the characters, but was without a doubt my least favorite in the series thus far, with the biggest highlight that I can give this movie without a doubt being the introduction of the new character Mo, who is a little bit annoying at some points, but also is kind of a charming, cute character that I enjoy the camaraderie when it comes to him and the rest of the gang. And outside of that, I really enjoyed the animation. As I mentioned, we have a blend of some 2D and 3D animation in this movie, which was something new to this series. While we have had kind of slight moments of 3D animation, there hasn't been an abundance of it in this series thus far, as most of it has been 2D, which is something I really appreciate. But it was nice to see a blend of both 2D and 3D animation at times throughout the course of this film, giving it a little bit more of a modern look. Beyond that too, one of the most notable things for me was as the movie started, I started to think that maybe they recasted almost all of the main kids that we had followed. Now, some of the actors had been changed out over the course of time already because some of the actors had either passed away or had aged out of the roles. But for the last good chunk of films at this point, I want to say the last 6 or 7 of these films, majority of the main cast members who have been playing these main characters have been the same kids. And so I started to notice that their voice was a little different in this film. I looked it up to make sure, and it was still majority of the same people who have been playing them in the last few films. And it just turns out that when it comes to this movie, these actors were starting to get a little bit older. So I actually really enjoyed that. And it's most notable when it comes to the character of Littlefoot, played by Thomas Dekker, who you can clearly tell was starting to maybe, age up a little bit. He was starting to maybe hit puberty. His voice was starting to get a little bit deeper. And so throughout the course of the film, it does feel like our characters here are maybe a little bit older than the versions that we had seen in previous films, which is something I would really love to see. I was talking to Mike that I ended up coming across these images that I found online that are just fan drawings, different fan art for these characters where they show them grown up. And I would honestly love to see a new installment in this franchise, a 15th film where they can actually be aged up and be adults. I think at this point, with 14 films of them all being kids, a 15th film of them all being grown up to kind of wrap up the series, I think would arguably be the best way that they could wrap up the series. And I honestly get a little bit emotional looking at those images of them all getting a little bit older, maybe just because I have that nostalgic attachment to these characters. So I think it goes without saying that while I enjoyed myself, I found this film to be a little bit more generic and bland than the previous films, while also having a lot of that core stuff that you come to expect from a Land Before Time film. I wish there was a little bit more to say on this movie, but like I said before, I found that generally it felt fairly uneventful. It felt very one note. Let's help this character get to this other place. There's a monster that chases us and we have to fight off at one point in the film, and that's pretty much it. The film is not very long, but like I said, while these films are generic from time to time, I just genuinely found that this one was even more so. So with all that said, a big thanks to you guys for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed, and please leave any and all comments down below. What are your thoughts on the 9th installment in the Land Before Time series? What is your favorite installment in the series? And as usual, I definitely want to say a big thank thanks to my buddy Mike of Did You See That for joining me once again in another video. You guys can find the link to his channel down below in the description box. Go give him some love, let him know I sent you. And with that said, I'll see you beautiful people in the next one. Bye-bye.